From a motorcycle hidden inside a basement wall for 50 years, to the most famous chopper ever built vanishing after a robbery that still hasn't been solved, some of the greatest bikes in history didn't just stop being made. They literally disappeared off the face of the earth. And the stories behind how they vanished, honestly, some of them are wilder than anything Hollywood could come up with. These are 9 legendary motorcycles that vanished forever, and we're starting with a mystery that has stumped historians for over 100 years. Number 9. The 1916 Traub. In the late 1960s, a plumber doing a routine repair in a Chicago suburb had to crack open a basement wall to get at a busted water pipe. Behind that wall, bricked up like something out of an Edgar Allan Poe story, sat a complete motorcycle. It had been sealed inside that wall for over 50 years. The homeowner eventually explained what happened. His son had stolen the motorcycle sometime around 1916. When the father found out, he was furious. He forced his son to enlist in the United States Army. The son shipped off to fight in World War I and was killed in action, taking the secret of the hidden bike to his grave. Now here is where it gets really interesting. This was not some beat-up junker somebody forgot about. The Traub, as it came to be known, is often called the rarest motorcycle on Earth, a true one-of-a-kind machine. Its 80 cubic inch sand-cast V-twin engine was enormous for its era, nearly double the displacement of most bikes on the road. Museum curator Dale Wachsler estimated it could hit around 85 miles per hour at a time when most motorcycles topped out around 50. It featured an unusual 3-speed transmission rarely seen on American motorcycles of that period, with 2 separate neutral positions that would not appear on production bikes for decades. And the rear brake design used a single cam to simultaneously push internal shoes while pulling external shoes, a dual action system that was just absurdly advanced for 1916. But the wildest part, every single component was hand-machined. No part matches any known manufacturer from that period. Somebody built this entire motorcycle from scratch in a home workshop, and the engineering was remarkably advanced for anything built outside a major factory. The leading theory traces it to a man named Gottlieb Richard Traub, a self-employed experimental machinist who operated a small motorcycle shop on North Paulina Street in Chicago, not far from where the bike was found. A 1907 letter to a motorcycle magazine describes a homemade bike matching the Traub's specifications, written from Traub's address. He never reported it stolen. He died in 1952 without ever knowing his creation would resurface. The Traub passed through several owners, including Bud Eakins, Steve McQueen's legendary stunt double, before ending up with Dale Wachsler at the Wheels Through Time Museum in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. And yes, it still runs. Wachsler got it back to running condition with surprisingly minimal work, considering it had been sealed behind masonry for half a century. Number 8. The Indian 841. In 1941, the United States War Department had a very specific problem. Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps was tearing across the North African desert on BMW R71 motorcycles, and American forces needed something that could match them in sand and extreme heat. So they turned to Indian Motorcycle and handed them a $350,000 contract. What Indian built was genuinely ahead of its time. The 841 featured a 737 cubic centimeters transverse V-twin with shaft drive, a layout that Moto Guzzi would not adopt for another 25 years. 1,056 units rolled off the production line at Indian's Springfield, Massachusetts factory. But there were problems. The gearbox was unreliable, and the bike's top speed of about 60 miles per hour was not exactly setting the world on fire. More importantly, by the time the 841 was ready for deployment, a funny little vehicle called the Willys Jeep had proven it could carry more men, more supplies, and mount a machine gun while doing it. The motorcycle was designed to beat a BMW across sand dunes, and the Jeep could do that, and also haul a trailer full of ammunition. The Army canceled the program. The vast majority of Indian 841s were declared military surplus and sold off to civilians, who modified most of them beyond recognition. The transverse V-twin layout and shaft drive that made the 841 special were the same things that made its parts incompatible with other Indians, so restoring one today is a nightmare. Fewer than 100 are believed to survive, and finding one in original military specification is almost impossible. A motorcycle built specifically to fight Nazis in the desert that never saw a single grain of African sand. You cannot make this stuff up. Number 7. The AJSE 90 Porcupine. The Porcupine holds a distinction that can never be taken away. It won the very first FIM 500 cubic centimeters World Championship in 1949, making it the first premier-class motorcycle world champion in history. And it remains the only twin-cylinder machine to ever win that title. The nickname came from its distinctive cylinder head fins, which stuck out at sharp horizontal angles and looked like porcupine quills. Under those fins sat a 498 cubic centimeters air-cooled twin, producing 48 horsepower at 7,600 RPM, good for about 135 miles per hour. The original design, started during the Second World War, was actually supercharged. But when the FIM banned forced induction in 1946, the engineers had to scramble to make the naturally aspirated version competitive. Les Graham clinched the championship by a single point over Gilera's Nello Pagani, taking victories at the Swiss and Ulster Grands Prix. Bill Doran won the Belgian Grand Prix on a second Porcupine, securing the manufacturer's title for AJS. And in November 1948, a Works Porcupine set 18 world speed records at the banked Montlhéry circuit in France. Between 1949 and 1954, the Porcupines accumulated 24 race finishes, 5 wins, and 7 second places. For a bike that was originally designed with a supercharger that had to be ripped out at the last minute because of a rule change, that's a pretty incredible record. But here's the thing that makes this story genuinely bizarre. AJS only ever built 4 E90 Porcupines. They were works racers, never offered for sale to the public. And after AJS withdrew from Grand Prix racing in 1954, the company's racing records were lost in the corporate upheaval that followed. Every logbook, every race assignment sheet, every technical note were lost in the shuffle. No one can confirm which of the 4 machines actually won the 1949 World Championship. The bike that made history and the paperwork that could identify it simply vanished into the chaos of a collapsing company. Of those 4 original E90 machines, only 2 are known to survive today. One was rescued in pieces by legendary trials rider Sammy Miller from former AMC sales director Jock West in the late 1970s, and it now sits at the Sammy Miller Museum in New Milton, Hampshire. A second was assembled from parts found in the estate of former AJS Works rider Ted Friend after his death in 2006, and it sold at Bonhams in 2021 for over £290,000. The other 2 are presumed scrapped. The identity of the actual championship-winning machine may never be known. Edward Turner, Triumph's chief designer and one of the most brilliant motorcycle engineers who ever lived, created something special in 1940. The 3TW was Britain's first military twin-cylinder motorcycle, a 349 cubic centimeter parallel twin with a unit construction gearbox, weighing just 264 pounds. It was also the first British motorcycle equipped with an alternator. 50 completed units sat ready for dispatch at the Triumph factory on Priory Street in Coventry. Then came November 14, 1940, a date that Coventry would never forget. 515 German bombers from Luftflotte. 3 descended on Coventry in what the Luftwaffe codenamed Operation Moonlight Sonata. It was the most concentrated aerial assault on any British city during the Second World War. The Triumph factory took direct hits and burned to the ground. All 53 TW motorcycles were destroyed. Every tool, every jig, every production drawing, every spare part, everything. The bombing killed hundreds of Coventry civilians and damaged 2/3 of the city's buildings. Triumph eventually relocated to a temporary foundry in Warwick and later built a new factory at Meriden, but they could only produce the simpler single-cylinder 3HW since every shred of 3TW documentation had been obliterated. Not a single Triumph 3TW is known to survive today. The National Motor Museum at Beaulieu has what appears to be a reconstructed example, but of the 50 production units that rolled off the Priory Street line, not one made it through the night. 50 motorcycles, erased from existence in a single attack, and the engineering drawings that could have brought them back were burned to ash alongside them. But if the Triumph 3TW was killed by bombs, this next motorcycle was killed by something even harder to fight, its own brilliance. Number 5. The Moto Guzzi V8 Auto Cylindri. Alright, this one is special, and I genuinely mean that. In 1955, Chief Engineer Giulio Cesare Carcano and his team at Moto Guzzi in Mandello del Lario, Italy, did something that had never been done before and has never been done since. They built a 499 cubic centimeter water-cooled V8 Grand Prix motorcycle. 8 cylinders, 8 individual Dell'Orto carburetors, 8 unsilenced exhaust pipes. The complete engine weighed just 99 pounds. By 1957, the Auto Cylindri was producing 78 horsepower at 12,500 RPM and was clocked at 178 miles per hour at the Spa-Francorchamps circuit in Belgium. That speed would not be matched in Grand Prix motorcycle racing for another 20 years. The Discovery Channel ranked it among the 10 greatest motorbikes ever built. Fergus Anderson crashed it on its maiden run at Modena. Ken Kavanagh debuted it at Imola and led before retiring with mechanical issues. Giuseppe Colnago scored its first victory at Siracusa. Dickie Dale won at Imola for its second and final race win. But the V8 had a fatal flaw. It was simply too fast for 1950s tire, brake, and suspension technology. A crankshaft failure at 200 kilometers per hour meant almost certain death. By the end of 1957, fewer and fewer riders were willing to race the thing without major development. Ken Kavanagh flat out refused after a terrifying ride at Spa. Dickie Dale described the experience as riding your own funeral. Then Moto Guzzi, along with Gilera, Mondial, and MV Agusta, signed a gentleman's agreement to withdraw from Grand Prix racing to cut costs. The V8 was shelved overnight. Only about 5 complete machines were ever assembled. 2 authentic examples survive at the Moto Guzzi Museum, but the remaining bikes from that original batch have never been accounted for. A motorcycle so advanced that professional racers described riding it as a death wish. It was killed by a handshake deal in a boardroom somewhere in Italy, 20 years ahead of its time, and the world just was not ready for it. Number 4. The Vincent Black Lightning. Only around 33 Vincent Black Lightnings were ever hand-built at the factory in Stevenage, Hertfordshire, powered by a 998 cubic centimeter V-twin that produced 70 horsepower, with magnesium alloy components and aluminum rims keeping the dry weight to just 375 pounds. It was the fastest production motorcycle on Earth. And it gave us one of the most legendary photographs in motorcycling history. On September 13, 1948, American racer Raleigh Free lined up at the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah aboard a prototype Black Lightning. To reduce aerodynamic drag, Free stripped off his leathers and rode in nothing but a pair of swim trunks, lying completely flat on the bike. Life magazine photographer Peter Stackpole captured the moment as Free hit 150.3 miles per hour. 2 years later, Free pushed the record to 156 miles per hour. But Vincent couldn't survive the economics. Rising material costs and Japanese competition crushed the company financially. At over 500 pounds per bike, roughly the price of a 3-bedroom London house, the Black Lightning was simply too expensive. Production stopped in 1952. The company folded entirely in 1955. Founder Philip Vincent and chief engineer Phil Irving watched their life's work dissolve. Of the 31 Lightnings ever built, only about 19 matching numbers examples are known to survive. The rest have been lost to time, scattered across the globe by decades of ownership changes, barn fires, and neglect. 2 Lightnings shipped to Poland in 1949 were trapped behind the Iron Curtain for decades, considered completely lost by the international Vincent community until a British Vincent Owners Club member named Ian Harper managed to extract them in the early 1970s. How he pulled that off during the Cold War is a story in itself. In 2018, Bonhams auctioned a 1951 example for $929,000. Richard Thompson wrote a song about the bike called 1952 Vincent Black Lightning, which Time magazine named to its all-time 100 songs list. That's the kind of motorcycle we're talking about here, the kind that inspires songs, breaks records, and then vanishes into the fog of a collapsed company. If you're enjoying this deep dive into lost motorcycle history, hit that subscribe button. I cover stories like this every week. Now, this next one involves a $40 million secret that Harley-Davidson never wanted you to know about. Number 3. Harley-Davidson Project Nova. While Japanese manufacturers were flooding the American market with advanced multi-cylinder machines in the late 1970s, Harley-Davidson was quietly running a top-secret program that could have changed everything. Project Nova was a partnership with Porsche to develop a liquid-cooled dual-overhead Cam V4 engine. The 800 cubic centimeter version produced roughly 80 horsepower, which translated to about 100 horsepower per liter. A planned 1,000 cubic centimeter variant was expected to deliver 135 horsepower. Lead engineer Mike Hillman, an Englishman who had previously designed Formula One cars for Brabham, created a modular engine family that could be configured as a V-twin, V4, or even a V6. The engineering was staggering: an under-seat radiator, a fuel tank hidden beneath the seat, while the visible tank was actually an airbox. A rim-mounted perimeter front brake that predated Eric Buell's famous design by a full decade. Porsche committed 15 engineers from its research division. The project burned through an estimated $15 million in 1970s money, equivalent to roughly $40 million today. More than 12 running prototypes and 30 complete engines were built and tested at a secret facility in Talladega, Alabama. Then in 1981, Harley's management completed a leveraged buyout worth $81.5 million from AMF. President Von Beals, buried in debt, had to make a choice. Fund the Nova and bet the company on a completely new direction, or play it safe with the air-cooled Evolution 5.4, the Evo 1. Most of the Nova prototypes were quietly scrapped or rolled into the back of a warehouse and forgotten. Today, one prototype sits in the Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee, but it is partially constructed from wood and plastic. It does not run. It is essentially a display mock-up of what could have been. The remaining survivors are locked away in Harley's private warehouse, and the company has never publicly discussed them in detail. Think about that for a second. Somewhere in a Harley-Davidson storage facility, there are liquid-cooled V4 motorcycles designed by Porsche that would have completely rewritten the company's identity, and Harley has rarely showcased them publicly. The Nova's DNA did eventually surface in the Porsche-designed Revolution engine that powered the 2001 V-Rod, but the original bike that could have reinvented Harley-Davidson was deliberately killed and buried. Number 2. The Tsunami Harley-Davidson. This one is going to hit different. Fair warning. Ikuo Yokoyama was a 29-year-old motorcycle enthusiast living in Miyagi Prefecture, Japan. He owned a 2004 Harley-Davidson Softail night train, and like a lot of riders, he babied the thing. He kept it stored in a foam-insulated shipping container to protect it from the elements. On March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, triggering a tsunami that killed more than 15,000 people and swept 20 million tons of debris into the Pacific Ocean. Yokoyama's Harley, still sealed in its container, was carried out to sea. Over the next 13 months, the container drifted more than 4,000 miles across the Pacific, pushed eastward by the broad North Pacific Current, and eventually swept north along the coast of British Columbia by the Alaska Current. In April 2012, Canadian beachcomber Peter Mark discovered the container washed up on the coast of Graham Island in British Columbia. When he returned 3 weeks later, the container was gone. Only the Harley remained, half buried in sand and corroded by more than a year of saltwater exposure. Harley-Davidson traced the owner through the still intact vehicle identification number on the frame and offered to fully restore or replace the motorcycle. Yokoyama declined both offers. His response was simple: why should he have something back when so many people lost everything? He asked that the bike be placed in the Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee as a memorial to the victims of the disaster. And that is exactly where it sits today, deliberately left unrestored. The rust, the salt damage, the sand still embedded in the engine, all of it preserved exactly as it was found, alongside 1,000 origami cranes folded by members of the Minami Osaka Harley Owners Group chapter. The corrosion continues to spread to this day, and that is the point. Number 1, the Captain America chopper from Easy Rider. The most iconic motorcycle in cinema history started life as a pair of retired LAPD Harley-Davidson panheads purchased at a police auction for about $500 each in 1968. Peter Fonda bought them for a low-budget road movie he was producing with Dennis Hopper. African-American custom builder Ben Hardy in Los Angeles transformed those police bikes into the Captain America chopper, the one with the stars and stripes fuel tank, the raked steering head, the extended Springer front end, and the chromed rigid frame, along with the matching Billy bike that Hopper rode. Easy Rider grossed over $60 million at the box office on a budget of roughly $400,000. The Captain America chopper became the single most recognizable motorcycle on the planet and a defining symbol of 1960s counterculture. One Captain America was destroyed on camera for the film's final scene, where Fonda's character is shot off the bike and it explodes on a Louisiana highway. The remaining bikes, one intact Captain America and two Billy bikes, were stored in a Los Angeles warehouse. And then they were stolen. What happened next depends on who you ask. Peter Fonda told several versions of the story over the years, one involving armed robbers and another describing a garage break-in. Director Dennis Hopper told a much simpler version, saying the bikes were just taken from a storage unit and sold for parts. Nobody was ever charged. No police reports have surfaced. There were rumors linking the theft to outlaw motorcycle clubs retaliating over Fonda's earlier film The Wild Angels. But when journalist Mr. Zip 66 asked a longtime chapter president directly, he said he did not know anything about it. The stolen bikes were never recovered, and their ultimate fate remains a mystery. The only survivor was the burned crash bike that Peter Fonda gave to actor Dan Hagerty, who kept it for roughly 20 years. It then bounced through a complicated chain of collectors. Gordon Granger purchased it for $63,000 in 1996. It passed through the hands of museum president John Parham, and then Hollywood memorabilia collector Michael Eisenberg got hold of it. In 2014, Eisenberg's bike sold through Profiles in History for $1.35 million, the highest price ever paid for a motorcycle at auction at that time. But here is the final twist. The authenticity of that bike is still fiercely debated to this day. Builder Ben Hardy's role was overlooked for decades, and associate producer Clifford Sony Vaz, who coordinated the original build, was fired and left uncredited for 25 years. Meanwhile, builder Jack Lepler has constructed at least 17 replicas, muddying the waters even further. Nobody can say with absolute certainty that the bike Eisenberg sold is genuinely the one Peter Fonda rode across the American Southwest in the summer of 1968. The original Captain America, the real one, the bike that defined a generation, has been gone for over 50 years, and nobody knows if it even still exists. Somewhere out there, the most famous motorcycle ever filmed might be sitting in a garage, stripped down to parts, with the owner having no idea what they have. Or it was melted down for scrap decades ago, and the legend is all that remains. From a motorcycle bricked inside a wall by a grieving father, to a racing prototype too fast for human reflexes, to the most famous chopper in cinema vanishing without a trace, these 9 bikes prove that sometimes the most legendary machines are not the ones sitting in museums. They are the ones that got away. And the stories of how they disappeared are just as remarkable as the machines themselves. If any of these stories blew your mind, check out the video on screen right now. I think you will dig it.